Get started. So welcome everyone to our co-hosted webinar. We're going to talk today about ensuring compliance, enhancing security, specifically inside of the legal field. So go ahead and hit the next slide for me, Will. There we go. So let's just do a brief overview of the session of what we're going to cover. So we'll go through a brief round of introductions. We'll talk about generative AI, specifically inside of the legal tech field. We'll then discuss that AI and the technology therein about compliance and cybersecurity, enhancing cybersecurity, and how we get from introducing it inside of our firms into a secured state. At the end of it, we're going to have some questions. So as we go through, we have a couple of folks in the back end watching questions, so you can post your questions in the chat and we will get to them as they come across our screen that's presenting, so there's a slight delay. So as you have questions, go ahead and post them in the chat, and let's go ahead and get started on the webinar. So next slide, Will. Great. So my name is Jason Rutherford. I'm the managing partner and co-founder of Model Technology Solutions. Model was established back in 2014, and we've got a bunch of competencies listed there. So some of our past competencies that Microsoft in more recent years have retired, and then we have our current solutions provider competencies listed there. It kind of gives you a background for who we are and what we do. We are a managed services provider. We also do a lot of project services. So whether it's managing your devices or simply executing a project from start to completion, we're just a team of people really wanting to help move your technology forward. Next slide. With me, I'll turn it over to David to introduce Cynomi.
Yeah, perfect. Hi, Jason. So I'm David. I'm out of Israel. My background is 15 years in A200. It's a cyber intelligence unit. Then I've been in the cybersecurity authority in Israel, managing the technology, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cynomi. We believe in Cynomi that every company deserves a CISO level security, and we are trying to help through MSPs and MSSPs to SMBs and mid-market companies to be much better secured. We are the leading virtual CISO platform provider. Most of our customers are in the US, and we are trying to empower MSPs and MSSPs by providing them the ability to provide virtual CISO services at scale. We founded in 2021. Currently, we are about 40 employees in 3 offices in the US, Israel, and UK, and we have already hundreds of partners and customers. So happy to be here and to discuss AI, cybersecurity, and MSPs and SSPs. Great. So today we'll talk about generative AI and how it's implemented within the legal tech. You can move to the next slide, please. So everybody knows that generative AI or AI in general is the hot thing now. So many people, almost everyone is using generative AI in one way or another. And just some numbers just to demonstrate how important it is in our life. So the market is huge and will be bigger and bigger, getting to more than $650 billion by 2030, which is, okay, we cannot understand this number. Asking with this survey, about 85% of CTOs are currently deploying or plan to deploy generative AI or other LLM technologies within their companies. We understand that almost 10% of our data in the world will be composed of generative AI, which is unbelievable. And about 75% of surveyed organizations have budget or going to add budget to support generative AI adoption. So it's a huge thing, and I want to show you in the next slide an example how we use Cynomi, how we use generative AI within Cynomi. So this is, and Cynomi, it's not really different from any other company. So for example, we are a software company. We have a lot of content within our platform. And previously, before generative AI, we had to have a lot of content managers and people that writing the content themselves. Now we could cut it by maybe half or more than that, and to use generative AI to help us to generate a better content within our platform. Marketing, blog posts, webinars, even movies for marketing, we could produce with generative AI. It's really easy. It saves us lots of time. Sales, SDRs, BDRs, they are doing sequences. Now they can do it using the ChatGPT, so it's very, very powerful. R&D, our R&D team can cut the development phases by using code generation from generative AI. You want to do POC, you could ask generative ChatGPT how you could do that. So lots of clues, lots of examples getting from generative AI. And for our day-to-day as a management to create better emails, better documents, so save hours and hours from our time using generative AI. Of course, as anything, everything, it's not only enablement. There are a lot of threats coming with generative AI. So if you could, next slide, please. So we see the risk of generative AI mainly in two different disciplines. One is how we use generative AI like ChatGPT in our day-to-day by the employees of any organization. The risks for this implementation could be IP leakage, problems in compliance, legal risks, malicious code, etc. And I will discuss several of these risks later. Other topics is the writing applications. When R&D writing applications, they're using AI, SaaS programs, and they're using maybe different models for the generative AI. And lots of companies are using engines and tools in order to embed generative AI within the code, and this can create lots of different risks. Next slide, please. Our main concern for generative AI users are first how to treat the data that we put in the prompt and to prevent data leak or prevent regulation violation. And we know that when we have data and we want to get some good answers from ChatGPT or Copilot, for example, it's very convenient to take the data that we currently have from the email, from any database that we have. And we should be very, very careful because sensitive data from our organization can easily get into the wild open. And of course, if you are talking about legal companies, legal documentation, private data records from customers, they could be easily leaked if you are not making the right protections. The second thing related to the concern using AI is how to interpret the results from generative AI. So lots of times we get results from ChatGPT or Copilot and any other generative AI, and we just use it as is. And we don't know really how they create the answer, what is the information they take. It's probably correlated to the sequence of questions that we ask. And there are lots of times that there is a misinformation, and we should be aware that ChatGPT maybe know lots of things, but the answer that we get might be not very accurate. In parallel, we could have legal issues like taking information from without the permission of the entities that the generative AI used. So we must have very careful in what we are using and taking care of that. The third part, which is another main concern, is supply chain attacks using because there are so many applications and tools that using generative AI, and we could find in the open source many applications. We could use different things. We could think about almost everything that we could think about. There are some applications from generative AI, and not only that, the attackers are using generative AI application as well. They could create ones, they could use ones, they could use the ones that are not very protected. So using the generative AI tools that we might use could provide the attackers an access to our network, and there are lots of security vulnerabilities that can be caused because of using on unprotected third-party application and tools. Next slide, please. So how to protect the company, how to protect our legal company against cyber attacks using, of course, generative AI. So like any other cybersecurity, let's say, approach, we have people, we have technology, and we have processes. From people point of view, awareness is very important. Understanding that generative AI has a lot of risks is something basic for everyone that's using generative AI within our company. It's not only important to be aware, we must train. We must understand what we should do, what we shouldn't do, and in some cases, sanctions can be a very helpful thing that we might do. For example, if you are using the wrong generative AI, if you're putting sensitive data within the prompt, it's not a way that and even if it's very, very easy to do and it saves you time, you should not do that. Technology. Lots of new tools and technology is currently provided and accessible. Lots of startups providing new tools for detect data leak and protect the data, and trying to help us if we are doing mistakes, and mistakes always happens. And from processes, we have to build the culture of using the generative AI in a secured way. We must have a good communication and flow when we understand that something bad happened, when we understand that we put some sensitive data within the prompt, when we understand that we use the data, the output data, in a wrong way, or maybe if we are using some kind of application or tools which probably not secured. Next slide, please. In order to help companies to be secured, we in Cynomi take all the best practices using our CISOs and knowledge that we collected, and we generate a policy, a special policy that helps any company to understand what they should do, from people, from processes, from tools perspective. So this is a policy which is fully accessible and available, and you could download it using this link. Next slide, please. For those that listen to this webinar, there's something that's important to take as a takeaways from this session. So first, if you are talking about the three different concerns that we have using generative AI, and first talking about the input data that everybody is put into the prompt, I think two things you should take from that. First, educate employees on the standards of prompt creation and how to properly use it in a safe way. This is one thing that every owner of a business or a CISO or CTO and any technological person take educate employees, tell them, make sure that all employees in the company understand the risks. Then prohibit the use of sensitive or private data in the prompts. As I said before, it's sometimes very tempting to do that. We have it already within the data, but having the process that ensure that no sensitive data, no private data will be in the prompt is very, very important. Going to controlling the output usage. So read and read again the output from the generative AI content that you are using, and think before you put it within your email or presenting a presentation or anything that you do with the output from the generative AI content. Last thing about supply chain attacks. It's extremely important to map all the application and tools that you have that you use in the company. And since it's so accessible, some employees could find lots of different products and tools out there. So making sure that you understand and know what are the tools that are using within your company, this is very, very important. Of course, it's important to understand where they came from, because if they came from non-approved vendor, it's important to understand the risks, the vulnerabilities that can come from these applications. Last thing, and I think it's very important, as a company, to agree about the sets of programs that we allow the employees to use for generative AI. For example, everybody could use ChatGPT. We could provide a company license for ChatGPT or Copilot or any other things. But these are the applications which are approved, and these are and all the rest should be approved by the CISO, the CTO, the MSP, whatever. So these are the actionable takeaways that I think that everybody should apply after this session. And we could move to the next slide.
Yeah, thanks, David. So I'll go ahead and take over from here. So we can go ahead and move to the next slide, and we're going to talk about ensuring compliance of legal tools. So up on the screen, you'll see a list of legal tools, and David's remarks about reading the output of the data is so apropos. So just to cite a brief example, in June of 2023, a man was suing an airline for being allegedly struck by a serving cart. The court found that the case law that was presented had, quote, bogus judicial decisions with bogus quotes and bogus internal citations. Upon further investigation, a member of the team that was suing the airlines admitted they had used ChatGPT to do research for their case law, to cite their case law. And then essentially ChatGPT had what we call hallucinations. It made up some case law to support the claim of what the attorney had prompted ChatGPT with, right? So as a side note, the attorney also decided to incorporate this as he learned it from his college-age children. So the tools are going to continue to evolve and come across our plate. Currently, tools exist today for things like case research, documentation drafting, integration tools, effectiveness, data accuracy, all sorts of different tools. So understanding what your firm's position is on what tools you're allowing in, what tools you're not, and having a good policy around that is where we're going to keep going down this journey together. So go ahead and go to the next slide for me, if you would. So we talk about defining your standard, okay? And so in law firms, typically you don't necessarily have a regulatory compliance that you have to adhere to or stick with. A lot of times that's dictated by the type of clients or clientele you're representing, okay? And so when we want to, let's say, put in a set of processes, tools, and assign the right people to the right tasks for these processes, we need to define that standard up front and first and foremost, okay? So just because we're not obligated, let's say, to follow a 27001 regulatory compliance standard framework, it is something that will benefit you tremendously as we go. And adopting this framework to protect your sensitive client information and ensure compliance with relevant laws and regulations is extremely helpful. And we're going to cover some of that here coming up. Let's go to the next slide. So some of the benefits of compliance, we're going to cover this pretty briefly, but because they're pretty common sense, right? But the benefits of compliance. So let's talk about reduction in risk. You stay up to date with changing laws and regulation, which automatically being up to date with it and adhering to it will reduce your risk overall as an organization. One of the things that a lot of folks don't think about when they say, let's implement an ISO 27001 standard, is the efficiency that's going to be gained out of the organization. So operational efficiency. So those processes and procedures are significantly streamlined because now you've defined it and you've mapped it out and communicated it out to everybody in the team, right? So that organizational efficiency can be felt. Moving down the list, we have a positive public image. So think about demonstrating a commitment to safe and ethical standards and what that's going to do for your outward image to your clients, to who you represent, to the data that you have in your possession. And then ultimately, because a lot of these frameworks have all sorts of business continuity, disaster avoidance, disaster recovery plans built in, it creates a resilience that your business can withstand and go through as regulations change, as catastrophes happen. And one of the quotes that I wanted to bring up out of the American Bar Association Cybersecurity Handbook, this is important to note, is that there are only two types of companies: those that have been hacked and those that will be hacked, right? And this is from the handbook from the ABA. And so generally, when you think about being resilient and how you can thwart off being hacked or what happens when you get hacked, following this framework gives you that game plan to be able to execute against it. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So we look at it, and so David and I are kind of saying the same message. We've talked about here's what we need to do, but how do we actually put that into place? And we're going to try to cover that next. So governing we'll talk about govern, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. And if you're familiar with the CSF or NIST framework, CISV8, these are all very similar in those kinds of frameworks. But first, you have to determine what it is you have to manage, okay? Once you've determined that you have to manage something, we'll call it AI as an example. Now we have to identify what components of AI exist in our environment today, what components could exist, what policies need to be written. Moving down the list to protect, we've identified that we need to govern AI. We've identified that here's the tools that currently sit in our environment today that are AI components or have AI ins and outs, right? Input, output data. Now we have to create policies to protect the data, whether it's a firewall rule or whether it's some other kind of sophisticated system to be able to look at where the traffic's going, where it's coming from, what's going into it, or it's a written policy that's communicated out to everybody that's on staff in the organization that could be using it. Then we have to put some form of detection in place, whether that's a manual process or that is an automated process using some tools. Then we have to say, what is our response in the case that this happens, right? And then finally, how are we going to get things back in order if something did happen, right? So this is a very high level framework of what we need to apply inside of our law firms. So if we kind of go to the next slide, we're going to talk even more about the details of how do we enhance cybersecurity. So the first part I just covered was really your standards of cybersecurity, right? We have to identify, detect, respond, recover. We have to define a framework that we're going to follow. But now let's talk a little bit more in depth about enhancing that cybersecurity. And David said it earlier, but I'm really going to hammer this home. Our people, our process, and our tools are the critical components to getting cybersecurity put together for us in our firms. So let's start on the people slide. So in our organization, you have a variety of different kind of folks and people on the team, right? And this is required inside of most any size organization, but we have our internal staff that are trained and supporting tools and supporting members of our team. And then we have typically some sort of managed service provider helping out your internal staff, and likely a combination of the two. So those people are doing the actual controls of it. But then if you go to that last bullet, the organizational support is so critical to making this successful. So leadership inside of your organizations, inside of your firms, they have to believe that cybersecurity in general is a focus, right? That some kind of regulatory compliance framework guideline is important to follow, right? So we all know that attorneys, they have ethical and professional obligations to protect their information. Those things can all be supported in the cybersecurity realm by cybersecurity initiatives to help maintain that client trust within inside of your firm, right? So people are key. The internal staff, anybody that's helping you, like a model team from a managed services or a project standpoint, and then the organizational support, the leadership of the firm. It's important for that. And if we go to the next slide, we're going to talk about our processes. And I'm going to quote the ABA handbook because there's another good one in here. So in another quote, if you think technology can solve your security problems, then you do not understand the problems and you do not understand technology. Okay. So thinking about that objectively, a tool's not going to save you. But what will is a combination of the right people with the right processes running some tools to help you out. So let's talk about those processes. So communication is absolutely foundational to understanding what's going to happen and what's going to occur. And part of that communication is assigning responsibilities accordingly. So once you've communicated, and I can give great examples of things, tabletop exercises that you would run through in case of a disaster, of communicating who's part of the team, what responsibilities they're going to have in this team, and then practicing that frequently and assessing it on a regular basis. And I think we're all guilty of saying, yeah, we need to practice our disaster avoidance plan, just as one example aside. But how often do we actually go through that exercise? How often do we have a down situation to where we're testing this and ensuring that our processes meet what we're trying to accomplish as an organization, so that if something were to happen, then we know what to do and who's going to do it and what the chain of command and communication is. So we have our people running those things. We have our processes that are dictating the framework of how those things are done. And then we have our tools, the last slide in this piece, which I listed a couple of tools up here that are critical. And we'll start with the proper licensing from we'll just use Microsoft or Microsoft Shop. In the Microsoft stack for tools, things like SSO or DLP, understanding what data is coming into your organization, what data is leaving your tenant, in and out of your tenant, having the proper licensing is essential to ensuring you're going to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish from a cybersecurity perspective. We can use Copilot as an example, another version of AI that David was talking about, and ensuring that we've helped some companies set up Copilot. And here's the number one thing for it is are your permissions segregated accordingly? Do you have somebody that can, let's say, research executive level or partner level salaries from a simple search, because now Copilot is making AI aware of all the data that person has access to? So is RBAC properly configured on all of your SharePoint sites? Those kinds of things, right? But to get there, having the proper licensing for the Microsoft stack is important. The next thing is the cybersecurity vCISO portal from Cynomi, right? So Model Technology and Cynomi are partners. We leverage this at a ton of our customers. And I'm going to call it a checklist for how to do enterprise IT the right way, okay? So taking one of these frameworks and putting it in place, following that NIST or the ISO 27001 framework, we're doing disaster avoidance, disaster recovery, identity and access, we're managing AI. All of that comes from a master list of what do we need to be monitoring? What do we need to be putting processes around? What do we need to be having humans actually run and operate? That comes from this vCISO portal that Cynomi has created. It's a big regulatory compliance checklist for how to get compliant in a framework and how to do enterprise IT. And then finally, some sort of managed detection and response. That's critical to ensuring that every alert in your organization is managed accordingly, right? A lot of times we say, all right, we're going to stand up Defender. We turn on Defender. Those alerts become white noise, right? They become white noise because we don't have enough humans inside of our firms. We don't have enough people to be able to manage those alerts as they come in. But a lot of times you're thinking, well, we've seen this alert. It's probably that alert again and again and again. We cannot let that go to white noise. So having some kind of managed detection and response, whether it's from model or somebody else, is critical to ensuring that your cybersecurity and your AI platforms are being managed effectively inside of your firms.
Jason, I think that what's nice about the list of tools here, that it's tools, but it's embedded people and processes within.
Yeah.
So I guess that managed detection and response, you have the right people that know how to do that. In the virtual CISO portal, we have dashboards that help you to engage your management and that everybody understand and that to have the right processes. And the same for them for the Microsoft and the dashboard that you have there. So using the right tools helps you to make sure that processes are in place and the right people are in place using the tools and create a cybersecurity resilience within the company.
Yeah, you nailed it. And you said it earlier in your presentation too, David. It's those people, process, and tools. It's all three working together. It's not this new found awesome tool that does all this automated things for you. You still have to have a person or a process or somebody responsible for it. And until you are managing that effectively and detailing it and providing evidence and attestation in something like your cybersecurity portal you've created, then really is it actually being effectively managed? And that's what we run into quite a bit in our consulting endeavors.
Yeah, and I think that NIST 2.0, when they added governance, they just meant for that. So it's not enough to have tools. You must make sure that you govern it. You're doing the right things with people and processes to take the tools to be much more effective.
That's absolutely correct. I was actually formulating a fish tank analogy for all this, but I decided to abandon ship. Well, David, that's the end of our presentation. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out at any time. If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. We're at model-technology.com. And David, what's the easiest way for, they can come through us to get to you, to get the Cynomi portal. So just reach out at model-technology.com. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.